Hello everyone and welcome back to the fanfic reread project. In this episode we are going to be continuing our reread of The Dark Knight Rises with a Selina chapter. If I sound vaguely tired, it's because it's 7:33 in the morning, but I have shit I have to do today and it's probably going to take a while. So for the next few episodes I may or may not sound a little bit tired because I'm recording these kind of early in the morning. They went uptown that night, way uptown, to some apartments on some street she didn't bother to get the name of. The place was nice, silver and white, per usual, but it was strange to see that as a background for a bunch of regular people instead of the rich and famous. It was a change of pace she could get into, actually, as long as she didn't spend much time thinking about the people who'd lived there before. She wasn't all that into the scene. She'd heard things about these parties and shit tended to get crazy when there was no chance of it getting shut down, but Janet begged her to come along this time. She obliged out of pure curiosity. She wanted to see what everybody was doing up there because once night fell, the streets became vacant, and that was something that had never happened in that part of town before. It got wild up there really quickly, just like she predicted. You give us a city and we'll tear it the hell down, she thought. Jen was having the time of her life. Good, Selina thought. She deserved it. They all did, really. She ended up wandering all the way upstairs, though, until there weren't any people around. All the floors looked like shit. Broken glass everywhere, stuff all over the floors, sheets pulled off the beds. She wandered into one of the rooms, stepping over the silverware that had been dumped all over the floor. They'd even knocked down the goddamn chandelier. Just to think that a month or two ago she would have had to sneak into a party in that part of town or fake her way in or charm some douchebag into saying she was a last-minute date. Things had changed so drastically and so fast. There were riots the same night she'd gotten out of jail. By Thanksgiving, the mayor and the DA had quote-unquote gone missing, and the rich were being pulled out of their quote-unquote decadent nests, just like he'd said. She had told herself that it would take some getting used to at first, but as time went on, she couldn't get used to everything. She'd wandered toward a window when she heard glass crack under her foot. She looked down, thinking it'd be from a mirror or something, to find a picture frame. The glass was broken and the frame bent, thanks to her, but the picture was mostly unharmed. It was a cute little family, 2 guys and 3 little girls. She wondered what happened to them. I don't really want to get too into this before we finish this chapter, but I feel like this chapter we're finally really starting to dive into the middle part of Selina's character arc regarding her thoughts on the rich people of Gotham. I know the last time I read this, which was the first time I tried to record these, I kind of had a problem with the way Selina's arc handled her changing thoughts on like the rich people of Gotham. If you've ever heard that John Green quote about imagining people complexly, it's basically like her entire arc centers on that. But again, I don't really want to get too into that until we at least finish this chapter, so let's keep going. What's that? She heard Jen slur behind her. She handed her the photo. This used to be someone's home. Now it's everyone's home, Jen hiccuped back. Hell of a way to treat your home, she said, gesturing toward the chandelier. You're doing it again, Jen said. Selina let out a sigh. Look, I'm gonna head out. Why? You have fun, she said, moving for the door, and try not to, pass out or anything. That part always bothers me genuinely because it's like rule number 1 that if you go out and you're even if you are drunk but you're less drunk than your friends or something, you're just tipsy and they're plastered, you do not leave your girlfriends out alone when you've been drinking. That's just completely red flags. You do not do that because that can lead directly to someone getting taken advantage of. And you especially don't do it if you're fucking sober. If she was going to leave, then she should have told Jen to come with her or made sure someone was going to bring her back home, because now Jen is just out there drunk alone, basically, with God knows who doing God knows what. That's very dangerous and very irresponsible. Again, this was written in 2013, so, and this is saying something because I don't go out with people nowadays, but just through osmosis you learn these types of things. And I guess when I was 20 I didn't really understand this, but anyway, things seemed to have calmed as she made her way down the stairs, or maybe everybody was just fucking, she didn't know. Oh god. Now that was one F-bomb drop that felt kind of edgy for no reason, but it's whatever. Once she'd gotten back to the first floor, the crowd of people had gone completely mellow. It was weird as hell. She dismounted the stairs and started for the door when someone spoke to her. Leaving so soon? She gritted her teeth at the sound of his voice. Bane was sitting on the stairs she'd just come down, leaving her wondering how she could have possibly missed him there. Also, this is the thing that always weirdly bothers me, because you could have easily rewritten this so that Selina like came down onto like a landing in the stairs or something like that. You know, when stairs like turn and then you go up, there's a landing, and then you go up and then you actually reach the floor. And it could have been like that, and then she could have stopped and saw him sitting on the stairs instead of inexplicably walking past this giant ass man who probably takes up most of the stairwell anyway. Like, she would have consciously had to squeeze past him and then been like, oh wait, and never realized. Like, that doesn't make any sense. You really know how to bring a party down, don't you? She said. She hadn't meant to say anything to him, but the words had just come out of her mouth. She couldn't think of any other reason everyone would have chilled out like that. He just shrugged. I don't always mean to. What was that supposed to mean? I'm shocked you didn't send anyone after me. Are you? He said, raising an eyebrow. Even after I spoke to the police. And what would they do? John Daggett was the one so desperate to have you dead, not me. Your presence doesn't frighten or threaten me, he said offhandedly. Ooh. Of course it doesn't, she said. She continued her trek for the door then. She had no reason to subject herself to that. To what? He just said you don't scare him. He's not like saying anything rude. The power was out again when she got home, which had failed to surprise her. She threw her coat on her bedroom floor along with her boots and fell into the bed. She sighed out in frustration. But why was she frustrated? Had she really been expecting Bane to have been worried about her running off to the police? Daggett sure was, like he'd said, but Daggett was an idiot, and Bane had taken care of him and the police. If the whole damn police force was helpless against one guy, what would she have done? Maybe she was just used to people being scared of her, but that was useless now. She was damn sure nothing scared him, not the police or the Batman or anything. Why does that line remind me of something from A Song of Ice and Fire? I don't know why. Anyway, the Batman. God, she didn't even want to think of what happened to that guy. He was probably long dead, or at least shattered into a million little pieces and paralyzed. She barely remembered what happened that night after the lights went out, except the pain. Whatever he was put through must have been a million times worse. People were going to have a fit once they figured out that he was Bruce Wayne, and there was no way Bane wasn't going to tell them. She still had her doubts about that, though. She had met Bruce Wayne, and while he wasn't exactly like the personality he liked to cultivate for the tabloids, he was no Batman. That wasn't the face of a man who would take down an entire SWAT team to save some hostages or allow himself to get blamed for the deaths of 5 people. Bruce Wayne might not have been a brainless asshole, but he wasn't shit next to the Batman. And that is the end of her chapter. This is what I was talking about last episode, when it seems like Selina and John's chapters for a while always end on them thinking about the Batman and how he kind of appears to them. Again, I was trying to convey that idea of like seeing how people who have no relation to Bruce Wayne or Batman before the beginning of the story think about Batman. Yeah, so this chapter wasn't terrible. It kind of felt pointless though. Like, for what it is, it's not written super badly, and it does have some important character stuff for Selina, but action wise it really just felt like she went uptown for no reason, just to facilitate some thoughts and then came back home. And while from a Doyleist perspective that's not necessarily bad, you should probably hide it better. Because you shouldn't come away from a chapter like this feeling like, okay, the whole point of this chapter was so she could do this and then have these thoughts. Because, that's kind of revealing too much. So anyway, yeah, this is starting to get into Selina's arc, and it's an intertwining arc with her thoughts on Bruce. How she starts out having very two-dimensional feelings about the rich people in Gotham and the people that she deals with, but then down the line she comes to realize that, they're people just like we are, but they have, it's a whole thing. And of course it ties in, like I said, with her thoughts of Bruce, where she starts out thinking that Bruce is like just like everyone else, but slowly realizes that he's a lot more than he says. My problem with this arc is that I feel like it doesn't really factor in the fact that the reason why Selina feels the way she does is because she's poor. It's not just like some lady who's having like two-dimensional, like she's flattening all of these rich people into this stereotype of this, that, and the other. And I feel like the story doesn't interrogate well enough why she does that. Because it's not just like Selina in particular thinks that all rich guys in Gotham are scum and all the rich people are gaudy and this, that, and the other. Like, Selina feels the way she does because she is actively oppressed by the rich people of Gotham. And I feel like you can't just ignore that to make this about her personally coming to realize that, oh, they're people too and they deserve to be. And this is, to be fair, this is a very complicated subject because, on one hand, yes, the reason why Selina flattens these people down into not really stereotypes, but sort of stereotypes, is because of the place that she occupies. On the other hand, yes, it is important to realize that these people are still people and that what Bane is doing isn't right just because they do have, like, even though his message is very, like, good, his methods of acting out that message are very, like, suspect. And that's okay for her to realize that down the line, like, oh, maybe like murdering all the rich people in Gotham isn't the way to solve the problem because it's not actually dismantling the system. Like, that's fine. But Selina's arc doesn't feel like it's about that. It feels like, you know what? There is a character who has an arc like that, and it's not Selina. It's the fourth POV character. And I feel like in his, it's like better done. But with Selina's arc, her arc is more just about realizing that rich people have depths, which, to be honest, doesn't feel necessary because we all know that. That's not something anyone needs to learn. Selina doesn't flatten these people down. This is why I feel like the whole, like, growing to realize that the rich people are people too thing works better with the missing POV character because he's not from Gotham City. So it's easy for him to flatten these people down into two-dimensional representations of what they, like, stand for, quote unquote, without really thinking too deeply about who they are as people, because he is part of Bane's movement, and that makes it easier for him to go and take these people and allow Bane's other people to kind of do what they want. When it's Selina, however, that doesn't make sense because Selina has lived here all her life. She probably knows more about any of these rich people than she pretty much wants to. She knows that they're people, and her flattening them down is more of like a defense mechanism than it is anything else. And I feel like this kind of misses that point, and it creates like a false equivalency between the fourth POV who feels the way he does because he doesn't truly understand and he doesn't know these people, and then Selina, who the problem is not that she doesn't understand that they're people, but that those people actively hurt her. But again, we'll be able to talk about this continually throughout it, even in the edited chapters, because her arc doesn't change at all. So let's keep going. We are now moving on to a John chapter. It was colder than she thought it would be. They were barely into the winter and they already had snow. Again, playing coy with the date. It's like January. It's just the beginning of January. Say that. They didn't usually get any substantial snowfall until they were halfway to spring. The hurricane had done a number on the weather. Then again, the hurricane did a number on the city as well. It wasn't as bad as it should have been, and it was far from as bad as it could have been. Most of the island should have been underwater, she knew that, but she wasn't about to complain because it wasn't. I feel like it's not smart to lampshade, and again, this is part of, like, playing coy with the location and the actual time when this takes place. The year-wise, not month-wise. You do get away from being like, oh, well, this is Superstorm Sandy, so there's really no reason why it shouldn't. It's just a hurricane, quote-unquote. Again, I'm still a little boggled by why I didn't just say when this took place and what was going on, but sure. John pulled her hood up over her head. No one around here knew her except the people at St. Swithin's, but she wasn't up to taking any chances. She could hear glass cracking under her feet through the thin layer of gray slush that had accumulated on the sidewalk. Looters had been through that part of town too, and they weren't kind to the windows of the storefronts. The fact that a few of them had opened back up despite not being able to replace the windows said a lot to her. Yeah, it's like winter, that's cold. A pair of tanks rolled down the street when she pushed through the doors of the orphanage, followed by a large gray truck and another tank. She filed that away as something to mention to Gordon as she went up the stairs. The place was absolutely packed now. There were people everywhere, far more than just the children who lived there. The air inside was chilly and none of the lights were on, which meant that the power had gone out again, which didn't surprise her. She'd been here a few times in the last 2 months just to see how everyone was. Gordon and Foley had both advised against it, but that just pushed her to do it more. She wanted to get out of the house and away from them anyway. She found Mother Anita in the rec room, which was crowded with kids and adults and strangers. Cots and stacks of water were lined up around the walls. "How are they?" John asked her. "The kids? They're fine. The power was on yesterday. They got some TV. Most of them haven't seemed to notice that there's anything going on. They think we're having a big sleepover." She smiled. John smiled. She wished she could be so carefree. Is there any news? Is the commissioner... The less you know, Mother, the better. She nodded. She had started to say something else when she was interrupted by someone calling her name. This is a part where the pronoun game gets really confusing, but especially because that line, is there any news, is the commissioner. That's Mother Anita saying that, but for some reason it's separated out from the rest of her dialogue in the previous paragraph. I'm not entirely sure why. One of the sisters approached. John realized it was Sister Eunice. She remembered the heavily lined eyes that lay behind that veil, with Mark trailing behind her by the hand. Please don't ask me why there is a nun in this who has the same name as one of the nuns from American Horror Story Coven. I don't know why I chose Eunice. One note that I did want to make is that the most realistic thing regarding the effects of Hurricane Sandy on Gotham City is the fact that the power is like very on and off. I don't know if there was any places where it kept going on and then going off, but the fact that it's January and the power is still like very compromised, that is something that was a big problem along the coast here after the storm. He's been drawing on the floor again. Mother Anita let out a sigh. John should have guessed. His hands were covered in chalk dust. They're doing something with the thing, he said abstractly. What do you mean, dear? The mother asked him. Those guys with Bane, they're doing something with the thing, he repeated. Right after he said it, the lights flickered on. See? She thought back to when she'd sat with him on the roof and those little bats. He seemed to have a track record with these things. That was definitely something to mention to Gordon too, though it might be hard to bring up. Come on, the sister said. Let's wash your hands. She tried to take his hand again, but he moved to John. Johnny, your friend is outside, he said, taking her hand and pulling her towards the door. I guess I'm gonna go now, she said to them. Be careful out there, Joanna, the mother said. She heard Sister Eunice sigh behind her. She followed Mark out of the room and down the stairs to the front door. Mark, are you sure? She started to say, but he opened the door. Rose was right there in front of her, skinnier and paler but alive and not underground. They rushed into each other's arms. It felt like it had been forever. John turned back to the door. Mark, go upstairs and close the door behind you. After a second she added, and wash your hands. He nodded, looking like he was back in their world again, and went back inside. She didn't even know how Mark knew who Rose was, let alone that they were friends. But again, he seemed to have a track record with these things. I kind of like how in the edited version, in lieu of the fourth POV character coming in and sort of just like pulling the wool off of the reader's eyes, if not the characters, how we still pepper in little moments that show very clearly that the things are not as mundane as we've been led to believe. Because again, like I said, outside of that one weird moment with the chick with fangs and Batman Begins, there's no indication that there's any kind of actual like supernatural really going on. I guess actually no, Ra's al Ghul's tendency to point out exactly the right thing that Bruce is feeling and how to deal with it is a thing. But if that had been more subtle, there wouldn't have been any reason to believe that there had been any kind of like supernatural stuff up until now. But anyway, let's get back to this. John put her hood up again. How did you get out? She asked as she led her down the street. They let me out. What? Bane's men came and asked who was ready to serve quote-unquote true justice, and I said that if that meant they wanted me to kill for them, then I quit. John widened her eyes. I don't know either, man, but Bane told them to let me go, so technically I'm not on the force anymore. John looked down. That was weird. What did I miss? Rose asked her. John whistled. He let all of the prisoners out of Blackgate who were locked up under the Dent Act, and he's got a bomb rolling around the city that he said he's gonna set off if anyone tries to leave the island or get on the island. We've been mayorless since Thanksgiving. Rose looked at her. Jesus. John nodded and then added, oh, and the Batman didn't kill Harvey Dent. I'll fill you in on the rest of that later, though. Long story. She'd been lucky not to lose power at her house, but she didn't see any parts on the south side of town go dark for the rest of the evening. John offered Rose her bed, but she scoffed and said they could share. I barely take up any space as it is, she said with a laugh. She seemed to be the only one who noticed how quiet John was at the dinner table. Blake, Foley said as she started out of the room. Anything going on up there? She shook her head, but then she remembered. I saw trucks rolling through when I was up there. It was guarded by tanks. That's what they meant when they said it was mobile, he said. Yeah. She didn't mention what Mark had said because she still wasn't sure how to bring it up. What the fuck exactly do they mean by up there, quote unquote? Because if you remember from way back, John lives in Midtown. Scroll back even further. St. Swithin's is also in Midtown. It would just be in a different part of Midtown. So how much farther uptown can she possibly go? That's very strange. This might be a remnant, though this chapter is one of the edited chapters, and I think this chapter was edited pretty heavily. A remnant of the old version of the story when John and Gordon Foley actually had to leave where John lived and go to a different part of the city. In that case, going uptown to go to St. Swithin's totally made sense, but here it doesn't, and I should have changed that. Anyway, if we could find out where he is, Foley muttered. I mean, if they're really letting people out of the tunnels, we've got some people. We could get something together. No one will do anything with that bomb rolling around, she told him. But it's not going to stop rolling around. We'd have no choice. He raised an eyebrow. Didn't take you as the type to give up. I'm not giving up, she scoffed, shaking her head. I'm facing facts. We can't just storm in there and take him down anyway, Gordon chimed in. The situation is a bit more sensitive than you know. What was that supposed to mean? She ended up telling Rose everything about the lie, as well as how Wayne had been kidnapped and how the Batman was gone again. How does she not realize? Come on, man. It was nice to actually talk to someone about it. She couldn't talk to Foley or Gordon like she could with Rose. Can you believe that? John said to her, pulling the covers over her legs. I don't know, Johnny, she said from the opposite side of the bed. They had a damn good reason. There's never a good reason for lying, John scoffed. Not on that scale, anyway. Okay, but it's damn hard to tell people that the DA up and murdered 5 people after getting burned half to death. After a second, she added, and people were already blaming the Batman for all the other stuff that was happening. John looked up. So you would have done the same thing? You would have let them run him out just so the people could have their hero? Rose narrowed her eyes. I didn't say that. And honestly, would they have even believed him? Gordon, I mean, if he'd said that? Honestly, they probably would have thought that he had it out for the guy or something. John looked back down. Still isn't right. A lot of the shit the Batman has done wasn't right, but he was trying to help in the end, wasn't he? Why does it have to be different for the commissioner or even us? What about Bane, then? He said he's trying to help and he's out there killing folks. Rose sat up a bit. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The Batman hasn't killed anybody. You can't equate breaking legs with killing people. John nodded. But what about all the guys thrown in prison and denied parole? Look, I never said it was the most well-thought-out plan, but I'm sure they didn't plan on any of this ever happening. And it worked. John looked at her and she just shrugged, at least for a while, anyway. Maybe, she muttered, but it just wouldn't sit with her. Even back then, when everything was still happening, it hadn't. She just couldn't wrap her head around how they could dump the blame on the Batman like that, even if it meant saving face. Was she the only one who hadn't hated him back then? And that's the end of that chapter. I feel like we need to have more discussion about the people who were put in jail without parole. I feel like that keeps getting brought up as a kind of like, but what about this? And then everyone just keeps glossing over it. I understand that Rose is sort of kind of like, it's nice that these two people do have contrasting or different like politics, that they don't just sit around and discuss things that they exactly 100% agree on. It does make for interesting conversation. But none of Rose's points really stand up to any kind of decent criticism. And I feel like John didn't really give any decent criticism. She's just asking a lot of questions. Anyway, this chapter was interesting. I actually liked this. And unlike Selina's chapter, I do feel like this had more of a point. At least it was able to disguise if it was just John going uptown for reasons and then coming back home, which is really similar. It was able to disguise it a little bit better. And I do like that her and Rose talk about this stuff at the end, because again, no one has really like sat down and talked about this since ever, you know? But it does bother me that, like, John says there's no reason for lying, but Rose is like, but yeah, but they can't just tell people that this, that, and the other. But John is never, like, she never comes at it like, oh, well, don't you think it's better to tell the truth instead of not only lying, but using that lie to get laws made? And things like that. And I feel like this conversation could have had a lot more meat when discussing the actual like shit that went down because of the Dent Act and after the Bane. Like there's a lot of stuff that I feel like that conversation should have covered. Or at the very least, if you're gonna leave some of that stuff out, bring it up again later when maybe other people with more insight into different parts of the argument could come into the story and add something to it. I guess for what it is, it's not completely terrible. But yeah, I just feel like John didn't really argue all that much. It's not an argument, but that this debate didn't really have all that much debating. It's kind of just Rose laying out like, well, this is why they did it. And it's like, yes, we understand that. But then John is never like, well, this is why they shouldn't have. She's just like, it was wrong. But I do get the feeling that this is something that was supposed to be explored more in her later chapters, which unfortunately isn't a thing. Because I think this is her last chapter before the edit cut. But let's keep going. Are you coming? Selena shook her head and Jen let out a sigh. You can go to these things without me, she said. But you never go to anything, Jen said. What do you even do when I go out? Selena shrugged. Does it matter? Jen sighed again and then left the room. Selena didn't move until she heard the front door close. If she was honest, she was getting a little stir-crazy, but what was she gonna do? The excess had run out, though the party still went on, she guessed, and mobs were rolling through the streets uptown to find rich folks and drag them off to do God knows what with them almost nightly. She wasn't jumping up and down to see that. The people who'd been yelling about the Batman being violent were probably eating their words now. She opened the fridge to find it near empty again. That was nothing new to her by now. When they could have had endless amounts of food, they didn't have the power to keep it. She decided to pour Sylvie a small bowl of milk and save the rest until later, because she wasn't keen on standing in line at the supermarket any sooner than she had to. She wandered aimlessly around the apartment, trying to think of something she should do. She couldn't stay in the house too much longer, or she was going to lose her goddamn mind, but going to a party meant probably seeing people get carried off in the night, or even worse, maybe running into Bane. She was actively avoiding going south of King Street. It seemed like she was going uptown after all. Where to? The cabbie asked her when she hopped in. Uptown was all she said. Got a particular place in mind? She leaned back into the seat. I don't know. I'll give you however much it costs. Don't bother, he said as he pulled off. Ain't nobody got no money anymore. Ain't nobody got time for that. She watched the buildings go by as he drove. They used to get lighter as they moved north from the Narrows to the towering skyscrapers of downtown to the fancy marble buildings uptown, but it all seemed dark now. As he drove, she saw a large group of people outside some hotel. Damn, she heard him mutter. They got another one. The Narrows was never this bad. He let out a whistle. Baby girl, this whole town is the Narrows now. She couldn't help but agree. I actually kind of like that line, but I do kind of have questions about this entire quote unquote revolution that's going on. Is it really super realistic that the people of Gotham would just kind of turn around and join Bane's people in pulling out the rich people like this? I feel like on one hand, yes, it does make sense that the people who have been the lower class people definitely would be very angry about what's going on. So people rioting and looting, that totally makes sense to me, especially in the beginning. But these constantly going and kidnapping rich people and doing it, while some people probably would join up with Bane's official whatever, it does seem kind of weird because it feels like it goes against years and years of social programming in the United States for people to just very suddenly be okay with this. It's kind of hard to get into this without actually explaining how in our society, rich people are seen as morally upright because, fucked up societal norms. So it's really weird to suddenly, people aren't going to suddenly flip around and be like, oh, well, I guess rich people really are bad. Especially middle class people wouldn't. But everybody buys into social programming at some point. You have to do a lot to unlearn that. So it's really weird that everybody would turn around and be like, no, the rich people are bad, without actually doing the work to unlearn the idea that rich people aren't bad. If someone went to Bill Gates' house and plucked him out of his quote unquote decadent nest right now, there would be an uproar. People wouldn't automatically, just because some guy came on TV and said, Bill Gates is the instrument of your oppression. And most people would still be like, no, not Bill Gates. They wouldn't be like, yeah, fuck Bill Gates. That would be a very small fraction of us who actually unlearn the idea that rich people are just rich because they work hard, and all the others. There's a lot of that goes into it. So it's very strange to me that this is the way things are going, as if everybody here just needed to have the little wool pulled off of their eyes, and they suddenly realize oh, that's what it is. It feels very two-dimensional, but also this is happening for the sake of the plot. Things got quieter as they moved further north. She knew that when the booze ran dry, they'd probably burn down everything that was passing by her window. She suddenly got an idea. You know the Natural History Museum? Of course, he said. Take me there. How much booze do they not have in Gotham City that they would eventually... I guess they would, because no one's bringing it back in. But it feels like a very, very large city. It would be hard to quote-unquote run out of booze. Also, that's another thing that I feel is really weird, that people automatically are let's go party and commit crimes. We're gonna break everything. And it's that seems really weird. Like, that's everyone's first thing. Like, let's go. Not only are we gonna take the rich people and throw them out, then we're gonna go to their houses and we're gonna party and break all of their shit instead of stealing it and putting it in our house. that see, maybe that's just what I would do. But it's very strange that they're just like breaking the shit. And like, again, it's the kind of thing that you would have to unlearn, because the average person wouldn't walk into a rich person's house with no rules, no gods, no masters, and be like, okay, I'm going to wreck the shit out of everything. That's either someone who is already a pretty hard partier or someone who is against like materialism, so they break the shit as a political statement or like a social statement, you know? Not the average like random poor Joe is gonna walk into the house and be like, oh, this chandelier, that will look nice in my living room. I'm gonna make it my new coffee table. Like, not, let's break it and send a message to the richies. It's like, what? But moving on. The place was dark when he dropped her off, but the doors were open. Her footsteps echoed over the entire front hall when she walked in. That doesn't really make sense. Are you telling me the Natural History Museum was just open during all of this? Sure, why not? It was weird being there at night. It was weird to be there at all, but she had to say, the place looked a lot better without all the silver. As she stayed there longer, she began to appreciate the quiet as well. Funny that Selina's arc is about her realizing that hashtag not all rich people. But that line about the place looked a lot better without all the silver could definitely be read as a metaphor, considering the color coding. She couldn't help but be shocked that no one had tried to take anything out of the gem gallery when she wandered up there. Or maybe they had and someone had stopped them. She didn't know for sure. She couldn't think of why. If there were any spoils to be enjoyed, they were here. But maybe history was different. When she thought about it, she was in a place where she could take any of that stuff without even trying, and no one could stop her, but she didn't want to. Maybe that's what happened with them, too. Oh, we're going to talk about that at the end of the chapter. She drifted through the rest of the place, through halls filled with taxidermied animals in various poses mimicking life, and towering skeletons with absent eye sockets staring emptily into nothing. In the quiet and the dark, the place had a ghostly feel to it. She got scared halfway to death by a dinosaur that she nearly walked into by accident, a thing with heavy claws and huge teeth that stood at least 7 feet. Funny how they were terrifying even though they were dead, she thought. They didn't even have to try. That's a weird callback to Bruce's chapter when he went into, do you remember back in Batman Begins, the chapter right after Bruce came home from the monastery and he went down into the Batcave and he was musing on how bats are scary even though bats aren't trying to be scary, and then he was like, oh shit, I should be Batman. That's a weird callback because it's not a similar moment. But then again, like the every medicine has side effects callback also came from a moment that had like no relation to the original context of the line, even though it made sense. It's very weird. When she passed through the ocean hall, she could hear the people outside in the streets. Another one bites the dust, she thought, and felt morbid after. She shuddered at the thought of what would happen to whoever was out there. Hanging out with the Batman must have given her some sense of morality, and she was almost cursing him for it. Trying to ignore it wasn't working when it was happening all around her like this, stopping just short of prying her eyes open and forcing her to watch. But what could she do about it? And that's the end of that chapter. So, again, this is a problem with me having written this in 2013. Just like, I was a very different place as a person back then than I was now, particularly regarding certain social issues. We can see that with the way that I somehow in 2014 just managed to completely cruise over the fact that Selina's little commentary on sexism bits from her early chapters did not play as well when Bruce wasn't a dude. But this is something that does confuse me, though, because the people of Gotham, apparently, the moment that Bane comes and is like, this is the instrument of your freedom, and telling them that they're gonna rip the rich out of their decadent nests, not only do they immediately turn on rich people, they begin breaking all of the rich people's shit as if they're trying to make a statement about how none of this matters, because, you know, everyone just understands that, right? Not only that, but the implication of this chapter is that Bane left the museum because it was like history and valuable, as Selina says, despite the fact that if there's one place that you're gonna want to dismantle when you're coming in with your big, like, we're gonna tear down all the oppressive systems shit, it's gonna be the fucking museums. See, again, it's a problem of I didn't have, like, I don't want to say fully formed politics, because I don't think anyone has fully, your politics change throughout your life. But you can see how much of a different place I was in, because apparently I didn't understand that museums are oppressive institutions in a lot of cases, most cases, that like, especially even natural history museums, because while I won't say it's less common with them, there is still the issue of a lot of times people will go and that work for natural history museums will go into places that they're not from and take shit out of there that they aren't necessarily supposed to be taking. It's much more common with other types of history museums, but sometimes natural history museums have that type of history in it. So you have to be very careful with like the ethical lines you're crossing. And art museums are especially bad about it. So you would think that the first thing they would do is sack all the art museums and then repatriate anything that people stole, you know? But instead, it's just like, oh no, leave the Natural History Museum. It's not like we need to sell all of these gems for cash or anything like that, because science is important. Or let's just redo the Science Museum, you know? No. No. I'm just gonna let it sit there. I'm sure there's nothing important that might have to go back somewhere. Definitely, like the Gem Gallery one confuses me the most, because yes, it seems like a lot of stuff in the Gem Gallery was donated by people who willingly were just like, here, have this. I think it's a science. And they were like, yeah, it is a science. We'll put it in. But I'm sure there is probably like at least one thing in this fucking museum that might have been taken without permission, or it's just dubious whether it should even be in that museum. And no one ever came in and was like, maybe we should give that back. Again, I do think it is slightly less common with natural history museums because most of the time it has to deal with animals. And if the animal is dead, you can't give back a dead animal, unfortunately. But if like it's a bunch of animals that people tend to like, but there's still ethical issues, especially considering we don't know how old this museum is. So, but yeah, no, the museum gets completely left. Like, again, this is a common problem with the story. By the way, this chapter is fine. It's all right. It did feel a little aimless. It was mostly, again, a prompt for Selina to go somewhere and think thoughts about certain things that are happening in the story. But it's a matter of me not really understanding how this stuff actually works. Like, essentially, this story deals with a lot of really complex topics that even now I feel like I have trouble trying to handle absolutely everything that comes up. But a lot of topics are presented, and I feel like I just didn't even realize it. And I just kind of glossed over things. But again, it's not like on purpose. It's that I really didn't understand that certain things were problems. And I, on the other hand, was more focused on like the imagine people complexly, and John begins to understand how Batman works and all that stuff. But anyway, let's move on to the next chapter. I feel like the Selina chapter we just read should be immediately followed up by the John chapter that comes after the chapter we're about to read, but I understand why they're not, considering the relative lack of POV characters in this section. But let's get into this one. When he opened his eyes again, it was to darkness. His vision was only slightly blurred. Things were just a little fuzzy around the edges. His eyes hurt and his mind was making it hard to get a grip on things. He knew he was in a bed in a dark room with windows that were similarly dark, but he couldn't tell if it was really nighttime. As his head got itself together, he realized that there were wooden boards across them outside of the glass. The storm was his first thought, though he wondered why they were outside instead of in. Now that's a good question. As his head cleared, the memories started to return. Selina Kyle leading him down into the sewers into a trap and Bane breaking his neck. He felt his skin flush hot at the thought of it all. Then the pain in his back began. It throbbed in time with his pulse, but it wasn't as bad as he thought it would be, and it was nothing like what he'd felt before. He tried to remember what happened after his back was broken. It was hard. Everything was a mush of images and voices and sensations. The words trophy room seemed to stick for some reason. He remembered that Bane had said them, but he didn't know why. He lifted his eyes to the sound of a door opening. A girl started to enter, and there was something familiar about her face, and as she approached the bed, he realized that he knew her. That didn't need to be one sentence. I have so many questions for past me about the punctuation in some of these. Brianna? She jumped at the sound of his voice. It definitely was her, though her hair was blue now instead of red. What are you doing here? I work here. Well, I used to, she told him as she closed the door. He tilted his head lightly. Since when? A lot happens in 4 years. How long was I out, he asked. His voice was low and dry. So this callback, I think it makes slightly more sense. A lot happens in 4 years, because Selina said that the first time she went to the Natural History Museum, actually. And it is kind of interesting because the implication there is that Bruce hasn't spoken to Brianna since the events of the Dark Knight when he went to the party for Harvey. So that's interesting. How long was I out, he asked. His voice was low and dry. She grimaced. Oh man, 3 months? It wasn't the answer he was expecting at all. He thought he'd been out a few weeks, maybe a month at most. The shock must have shown on his face. I don't know what they gave you, but it knocked you out cold. Can you get the light, please? She came and sat in a chair by the bed and turned on one of the table lamps. The room still seemed dark, however. Green Victorian-style wallpaper covered the walls, the patterns winding across it like ivy. A bit of furniture had been pushed up against the walls, all in dark woods and black velvets and leathers. Even the lamp itself seemed dim, casting yellow light from an incandescent bulb. Why are the windows boarded up? He asked her. This is the second or the third time that we've mentioned the lights being dark to Bruce for some reason. I guess just keep a tab on that. The thing is that though I wrote this and I feel like I know what it's foreshadowing, I'm still not entirely sure why it's a thing. But anyway. The storm, she told him. Still? Bane took everyone else to the mainland before anyone could get them down, she said dismissively. The bastard locked us in here. She leaned against the bed and her body heat seemed to come off of her in waves. Where's here? He asked. Pain shot through his back. He pulled himself into a sitting position and he let out a hiss. She gave him a strange look. What? It's only been a few months, Mr. Wayne. You shouldn't be able to sit up yet. The more he thought about it, she was right. And yet, here he was. It had been painful, but he did it. She continued on. Dr. Ryan said you wouldn't be able to walk again for a year and a half at least, and Miss Sharp said December, but still. The news that he might not walk for a year seemed to pass him by, because the name Sharp had his attention. He had seen that name before. Where are we? He asked again. The mansion. He cocked his head to the side again. Like Arkham Mansion. She shook her head. Sorry. It wasn't the answer he was expecting, but then again, he didn't know what he had been expecting. Sharp was the name of the warden of the penitentiary. He remembered that now. Why would Bane dump him here? What significance did this place hold for him anymore? The phrase trophy room floated into his mind again. Who else is here? He suddenly asked. I was about to say. He says, like, what significance does this place hold for me anymore? And it's like, yeah, I can't think of anyone who might be here, who might be significant, wink, wink, wink. Come on. Besides us four, Dr. Crane, the Joker, he cursed under his breath. So that's what he'd meant. They don't ever come up here, though. Victor Zsasz showed back up last month. Still don't know how he got someone to bring him back. And Waylon Jones is still hanging around last time I heard. She shrugged. Not that you know anything about those two, though. The door creaked open again and another woman entered. So let's pause here, because this is one notable thing that we will notice between here and the edits, because the editing cut is coming up after the next chapter. This episode might be a little bit longer because I'm going to read that next chapter no matter what. But in the unedited chapters, Waylon Jones, who you may or may not know as Killer Croc from the comics, and Suicide Squad, I guess. He's not in it, and neither is Zsasz. I'm pretty sure Zsasz is still on the mainland in the other one. We will talk about why Zsasz was on the mainland specifically, and Dr. Crane isn't when we talk about Barsad's chapters. But moving back to the story. She was older, brown-skinned and black-haired. Look who's up, Brianna said, pointing to him. She raised an eyebrow. Glad you could rejoin the world of the living, Mr. Wayne, she said with a small smile. Letitia Sharp, I'm the director. He returned the smile, holding his tongue about the fact that he already knew that. Do you want anything for your back? He thought about it for a second, but then shook his head. It's not so bad, he told her. I've been worse off. All right, I'll go get Dr. Ryan so she can look at it. She backed out of the room and closed the door again. She's gonna have a fit when she sees you, Brianna said. You rolled over once while you were still asleep, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I can't blame her, though, she said, looking him up and down. Look at you. When did she say I would walk again? Next summer. Miss Sharp said this winter. I don't know now, though. Maybe it won't take that long. He sighed. I hope so. That was far too long for him to be here. 3 months was too long for him to be here. What would it be like out there in 10 months? In 5 months? He was getting anxious just thinking about it. Brianna seemed to notice. Are you all right? She asked, putting her hand in his. Yeah, I'm fine. He brought her hand to his cheek so he could feel the warmth. I'm fine. And that's the end of that chapter. Actually, the editing cut happens after the chapter after the next one we're about to read. So yeah, this episode's going to be a little bit longer. Content-wise, that chapter was fine. The writing style of it really bothered me for some reason. I've been able to kind of like look past it in a lot of the other chapters outside of momentary like why run-ons, but I don't know, it really wore on me for this one. I don't know. I think it was because there was a lot of repetition in this chapter. I think that's why. But again, content-wise, it's fine. It's important, and Bruce is back. So we have another POV character. I don't have much to say about this, especially because due to the editing cuts, we don't really get to see how Bruce being locked up with the Joker and Scarecrow and Killer Croc and Victor Zsasz really plays out. Because, again, after Bruce's next chapter, the editing cut happens and two of those characters disappear. And because of the editing cut, we're missing the original chapters where Bruce was in the mansion with the Joker. Because they did interact in one of the chapters, but that's gone now, unfortunately. But I'll try and fill you in on what little I do remember about it before we go into the unedited stuff. So anyway, let's move on. Now we are going back to John. Everyone looked up at the sound of a knock at the door. John was the one who answered it. She couldn't think of anyone else who would come. She was just as surprised as she thought she would be when she opened the door. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. So I think this chapter starts in media res because I wasn't sure how to begin it. So I just started from what I knew I wanted and wrote from there, which is fine. Because this chapter is completely new. This is something that wasn't in the original version. Miss Kyle? Surprised to see me? Selina asked with a smirk. Come in. John closed the door behind her quickly. How did you find my address? I have my ways, Selina said coyly. John raised an eyebrow. Don't look so surprised. You've seen my record. John let out a sigh. She had seen her records, and the girl was a mastermind, but she couldn't shake the paranoia. She thought her feelings were justified, however. Can we help you, ma'am? Foley asked. Everyone else seemed as on edge as she did. I'm not the one who needs help here, am I? And what is that supposed to mean? Rose said. That I want to help you do whatever it is you might be doing, Selina said, settling on the couch. Savor this, because I'm probably never going to do anything like this again. Then she leaned forward. You are doing something, aren't you? And if we were, Gordon said, coming out of the back room, how could you help us? Well, I know that if any of you were to show your face north of the gray zone, you'd be dead in minutes, whereas Bane doesn't give a damn about me. It wasn't the case the last time we saw each other, John said. Things have changed. They all looked at each other. They did need something to push them forward, but was Selina that thing? John was hesitant to trust her after what she'd seen. Then again, who would she sell them out to? She was damn sure she wasn't in with Bane after what she'd seen either. Maybe this was a leap they'd have to take, she thought, if they wanted to be able to do something. Talk to me, Foley said. Where is he? Uptown. Well, I could have told him that, Rose said dryly. Selina put up a hand. Let me finish. I've seen him in and out of the blank building when I've been up there. I didn't name the building, apparently. That's where Bruce Wayne's penthouse is, isn't it? John asked, shooting Rose a quick glance. Yeah, I guess it is, she answered quietly. What would he want with that place? Foley said. Then he waved it off. Either way, this is something we can work with. We can get someone up there. We talked about this, Gordon sighed out. Sure, maybe someone could run up there. Maybe they could take him out. But then what? He's got a kid. That wasn't something she was expecting to hear. You want to do that? Because I don't. You think you could have mentioned it before? I told you the situation was more sensitive than you knew. And even if we could do it, what happens then? He asked. Then he answered his own question. Retaliation. He's got a small army backing him up. Most of our men are still underground. And that's not even mentioning the bomb, Rose added. They see us trying anything and they'll sink us right into the bay. John suddenly sat up. But they don't have the bomb, though. What? The day the lights came back on, Mark, you remember him, right? She asked Rose, who nodded warily. He told me that they were doing something with it. A little boy told you that they did something with the bomb? I know, but listen, when he told me, he mentioned Bane by name, and literally the moment he said something, the power came back on. She pointed to Foley. You told him that Bane kidnapped the Wayne Enterprises board the day they blew up the tunnels. That Russian scientist wrote that paper about how their nuclear reactor thing could be used as a weapon, didn't he? And it was supposed to be able to power the whole city, right? The lights have been on steadily for over a month now. But why would he do that? Foley said. He said that they would set it off if anyone tried anything. Because he knew no one would try anything if they knew 12 million people's lives were at risk, she finished. He told me I wasn't allowed to believe in coincidences anymore. That I did, Gordon said with a nod. So maybe you need to stop focusing on Bane and start worrying about getting your guys out from underground while you still can, Selina said as she stood up. Because if he realizes that someone's caught on to his plan, the power's going to go back out real quick. And that's the end of that chapter. Like I said, that chapter's only half finished. For what it is, it's fine. I do think it's a little unrealistic that Selina would go to them. See, this is my thing about her arc throughout the story, in both parts, is that Selina does some things that it seems kind of out of character for Selina to do, given what we know about her. Why would a character who up to this point was talking about, oh, you better batten down the hatches, and seems to have like a complete disregard for authority, turn around and help the cops? I feel like it would make more sense if John was the one who asked Selina for help, because that seems like, oh, we're getting desperate, we need something. But for Selina to come in and be like, all right, I'm gonna turn around and help the police, that's just kind of like, all right. Yeah, the way that this story deals with the police is very eyebrow raising, but again, for what of that chapter we have, it wasn't bad. And I do like seeing John connect all of the dots there. That's always fun. So moving on to the actual last chapter we're going to read this episode. This is another Bruce chapter. It wasn't long before he was trying to walk again, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after he'd woken up. He surprised everyone when he stood for the first time, even himself. "You're starting to scare me," Dr. Ryan said, her big brown eyes growing wider. He couldn't blame her, seeing as she was the one who'd predicted that he wouldn't be mobile again until next spring. Didn't Brianna say next summer? Anyway, he couldn't go very far at first, just around the room, though he eventually got out into the hallway. It was surprisingly narrow, made worse by the dim lights and the dark colors. Doors lined the wall opposite the covered-up windows, each one of them closed. A few of them were even locked. There wasn't much else to see, because stairs were still out of the question at the time. He did finally get down the stairs, though his back was still a bit sore. He only went to the second floor because he didn't want to push himself just yet. The hall there was empty too, so he took advantage of the solitude to explore. This hall had the same old-style wallpaper, but with powder blue vines winding over periwinkle. Just like upstairs, most of the doors were locked. One led to a closet, another to a small empty room, and a third just opened to the wall, which put him off a bit. I have questions about how Arkham Mansion is set up. It seems like Arkham Mansion has like wings, but instead of having a hallway flanked by rooms on both sides, it just seems like the hall is against the wall and then the rooms take up the other side. That's kind of weird, but I don't know anything about architecture, so whatever. The pain in his back dulled with each passing day, which meant that he could stand straighter, walk better, and maybe even start building himself back up again. He wandered around the building just to keep himself on his feet, and he started to realize just how strange the place was. It was a maze of dark and narrow halls that twisted and turned around each other like the small intestine. Gross. There were more doors that didn't go anywhere, at least one set of stairs that didn't go anywhere, and rooms and spaces where there weren't room for rooms, and this was all before he even got down to the main floor. I did want to note that for the Arkham Mansion, apparently my main inspiration was Castle Bremenberg? I'm not sure how you say it, but the castle from Amnesia, The Dark Descent. And the way that, like, the layout kind of doesn't make sense, because that game is all about kind of, like, screwing with your head while you play it to make you feel the same way that the protagonist is supposed to feel. However, every time I read this, I realize less and less that this feels like Castle Brennenburg, and it feels more and more just like the Winchester Mystery House. Especially with, like, there is a staircase in one part of the place that literally goes up to the ceiling. That's literally something out of the Winchester house. Which, if you don't know what it is, the Winchester House is a big mansion. I think it's in California, but it's in the United States, that was built by Sarah Winchester. There was a movie about it starring, was it Glenn Close? Someone who played Sarah Winchester, and it's basically, like, it's rumored to be haunted, but the real, like, shining thing about that house is the fact that it is just so fucking weird. Like, there are literally, again, stairs that go up into the ceilings. There is at least one part where there's a door that is in the wall and you open it and it literally just like opens to the front of the house, like outside. And it's like straight drop down, no balcony, nothing. It's just a door to outside, like on the third floor. And there's a lot of other weird stuff like that, like really strange staircases and stuff. This feels more like that than it does like anything out of Amnesia or my other big inspiration for these stories, location-wise, Silent Hill. But anyway, the first door he opened led to an office. The room was bigger than the others that he'd seen and had furniture that was actually being used. He flipped on the lights and let out a small hiss as his vision went white momentarily. They were a lot brighter here and made the patterns on the mustard yellow wallpaper look like they were pulsing. Ugh. Everything in Arkham Asylum is just ugly. What's up with that? "You keep doing that," Letitia said behind him. "I noticed." He shook his head lightly. "Is this your office?" She nodded. "It's so bright in here." "I know," she said, stepping by him. "I've been meaning to get them taken out, actually." "Really?" "Yes," she said tersely. "It does terrible things to the wallpaper, and I can't get rid of the wallpaper." "Why not?" "It doesn't come off." "Oh." Why was that? That's his inner monologue saying that. "Does your back still hurt?" He shook his head. Not really. Isn't that something? I've never seen anything like it. It's kind of weird, though, isn't it? She shrugged. I've seen weirder. As time went on, he could feel himself getting stronger, but he was also feeling different. Uh-oh. that feel when you're feeling different. It started with his hearing first, like someone had gone and turned up the volume on the world or something. He brushed it off as the sound traveling through the vents at first, but then he realized that no, he was hearing things through the floors and the walls too. When it was really quiet, he could hear all the way into the basement, even though he was all the way up on the third floor. Everything else came along after that. He could smell when someone was cooking in the kitchens and feel when people were walking on the floor beneath him, even Bree, who he knew had a light step. He woke up in the middle of the night once and suddenly realized that he could see everything. When he turned the lights on, it was like the room was covered with a layer of fog. So I guess that was part of this entire feeling different thing. That's kind of weird. I've never heard of a person with night vision who sees worse during the day. That's different. But moving on. What are you doing all the way down here? Bree asked when she noticed him in the doorway. Is that a skeleton? He asked, eyeing the statue on the fountain in the middle of the room. Yeah? Doesn't seem conducive to the environment, does it? Speak for yourself. Bruce looked around her and saw Jonathan Crane across the room. I've always liked it. Of course he did, Bruce thought, but he held his tongue. What are you doing all the way down here? She asked him again. The pronoun game is... I understand that there's only one person in the scene that uses she, her pronouns, but it's still getting confusing to keep track of who is talking when it's constantly, like, her and she and him. Sometimes, like, say someone's name every once in a while. Sightseeing, he answered with a shrug. I got tired of sitting down. You didn't do that too, did you? He said, pointing to the back windows. That was starting to agitate him, because he couldn't shake the feeling that someone didn't want him to see something. I thought your eyes were brown, Bree said, taking his face in her hands. They are? But they aren't, though. They're yellow. He gave her a look. I know, but I'm serious. They are. He knew he hadn't looked in a mirror in a while. What happened to you before they brought you here? I don't remember, he lied, but now he was wondering himself. All this change was a little too well timed. What the hell was in that needle, anyway? Really? A voice said out of nowhere, sounding like a wet growl. This time it turned out that it actually was coming from the fan. Sorry, I don't know why that's funny. Okay, what's the date? And the 25th, Bree said with a shrug. Why? There was a moment of silence, and then it said, it's a full moon. There. Oh. And that's the end of that chapter. That last part when Bree is in the hall with him, it got really confusing at points. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so that's kind of a big reveal. Whoa, werewolf? We don't know. Probably not because it's a Batman story, but still. Moving on from that, because I have some stuff I actually want to talk about. Bruce implying that Bane had his people cover up the windows specifically so that he couldn't see what was going on. That's kind of weird and petty, isn't it? Like, I understand, like, to a point, at least I know when I wrote this story that did kind of make sense because I think Bane was trying to keep Bruce out of the know, but did he consider that, Arkham Island isn't, like, super close to the main, like, it is a little bit a ways away. He wouldn't be able to see anything significant from the windows there on the island anyway, unless they, like, blew something up. What would he be able to see on actual Gotham Island? And the other thing is, with the big back windows, that one's even weirder because the only thing you can see out of the back windows of Arkham Mansion is the rest of Arkham Island and then maybe parts of mainland New Jersey, which at that angle is pretty much nothing except I don't even think the neighborhood that Bruce lives in is at the same, like, I guess, is it latitude? Or sits in the same, like, direction that Arkham Island is. So I think that's further north. So literally what he's seeing is probably like swamp and marshlands. So what is he hiding from him? No one else is on the island. They're all in the mansion. So, but anyway, that's the end of that chapter. Again, the writing in Bruce's chapter, like the writing style bothers me, but the content of the chapters is okay. I understand why Bruce is exploring the mansion, and it does kind of help to build up to that reveal at the end that Bruce is kind of introduced to the weirdness of the mansion before someone points out that something weird is going on with him. And there is a parallel sort of like arc that we'll see as we go through some of Bruce's other chapters in the mansion, where as he finds out more about how weird things are in the mansion, the more he finds out weird stuff about himself. So I like that. I don't know how it was supposed to progress in this version because there are some important little tidbits that are missing from this that come up in the unedited chapters. But we'll talk about that more when we get to those. So overall, I think this is the first episode where the quality of the chapters is kind of up and down. They're all like decent, but there were definitely chapters that I liked a lot more than others. I think John's chapters in this one I actually liked the most. Selina's chapters could be engaging, but they felt kind of like I kept seeing through them to the actual like intentions of me as the writer rather than just feeling like I'm part of the story. Bruce's chapters, again, the content in both was interesting, but the actual vehicle, like the writing, isn't as good. But yeah, so that is the end of all of the edited chapters. From this point forward, we will be going into the unedited chapters. I will talk more about the changes in the next episode, especially because this one is running way over time. I think next episode we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Barsad before we get into John. So anyway, either way, I will see you for that. If you like this video, like it on the YouTubes, subscribe and watch other videos, and I will see you next episode. Bye.